Hello everyone, welcome to week 11 of AET 236. If you've noticed, I've combined weeks 10 and 11 because it's content very much builds off of each other. And so we're focusing on lighting. So just like last week, we're going to continue the lighting lesson. So last week you kind of dove a little bit into lighting surveys. What is, the nature of light? What's a lumen and efficacy and efficiency and all that sort of thing. And so this week what we're going to focus on is actually a little more into lighting design, I guess, in terms of determining, the sort of overarching question of the week 11 content is how do we figure out how many luminaires we need in a room if we know that, let's say we know how bright it needs to be, we know how bright it needs to be, we know the size of the room, that sort of thing, and it's like, here's a luminaire, how many of them do we need to provide an adequate amount of light? And as it turns out, it's, as you may imagine, since there's a whole lesson on it, like it's a little more complicated than you might think. So you don't just divide the lumens coming from the luminaire by the square feet of the room. It's definitely not that simple. And so that's the focus of this week's content. Okay, so again, if you haven't gone over the week 10 content, make sure you go over that first because that's really important to understand week 11. Excuse me, and then there's just a couple of videos here on something called the lumen method. And so the lumen method is a pretty common way to determine sort of one of two things. Either one, if you know the number of luminaires you have in rooms, right? So like I'm here in my office, sorry. Looking in my office and there's a couple of lights. I could look up that luminaire, I could look up the lamp and everything, and, look at the size of the room and other characteristics of a room and say, okay, how much light should those generate? So that's one way the lumen method is used. The way you're going to use it this week is if I know how bright I need it to be, if I know the illumination level in foot candles, how many luminaires do I need to provide that light, that amount of light or the brightness? And that's what you are going to try to do. So the lumen method is a way to solve, it depends on which variables you have. If you know the type of lights, like here, they're already there, the lamps are already there, I could do everything and then calculate how bright my desk should be. Or if I know how bright I want my desk to be and I know everything else but the number of lamps or but the number of fixtures or luminaires, then I can use the lumen method to calculate how many luminaires do I need to provide that amount of light. And again, that's what you're going to do this week. So I did post a video here, which is pretty good, gives you a good overview of what the lumen method is and sort of how you use it. And there's a couple of readings as well that I think will help you understand them. Just so you know, there is, in some of these there is a little bit of extraneous information, but you just read through them, watch the videos, and then really the key is to watch the summary video because that goes through the lumen method, how to use it, some of the considerations, and is more or less going to help you get through your lab because you're going to do a similar process for your lab, although a little bit different because you're going to do your own space. Now maybe you want to do a commercial room somewhere, that's fine if you want to do that, but you're going to analyze your own space using the lumen method. So again, the key is to just watch this video, read these readings, and then really focus on the presentation because that's really what's going to help you out. Okay, and then you have your lab this week, and you also have a quiz that's all of lighting, so it includes last week as well. So just keep that in mind that it's going to be everything from last week and this week. So of course, feel free to use the notes and the PowerPoints and so forth. Excuse me. But yeah, that's this week. You're going to do the lumen method, which is definitely building on what you learned last week. And so you're going to take the lab from last week, which is lab 8 here. And all of last week and this week's content is combined into one lab. Okay, and so you're going to do a lighting survey, that lighting analysis, and you're going to use the lumen method. It's all in a single lab. All right, so it combines both weeks, and that's why it's combined into one. Okay, so that's an overview of this week. It's useful, certainly for those of you that are going to be working in buildings, especially if you're designing buildings. If you're in the architecture degree, it's good to know how to properly light a room. And so the lumen method is one way to do that. Now, to be clear, the lumen method is an approximation. It assumes there's nothing in the room other than, bare walls and ceiling and floor. So it's not perfect, but it's a good way to start. Really, what you're going to use, hopefully, is a building model, and there are lighting building models out there that you can use, but that goes a little beyond what we're doing. But that's most likely in the field. That's what you would be using. But the lumen method gives you a good start and a good idea of some of the very important considerations for proper lighting. I think that's kind of the big takeaway is what impacts lighting in a room. What impacts how bright the desk is going to be, and if you take nothing else away from this, like the lumen method is good, but it's not great. The key is the lumen method. You really have to dig into all these factors, and when you dig into those factors, you really start to understand, like, wow, all these things impact lighting, and it's pretty complicated. And so I think it's important to have that recognition that you can't just be like, hey, I want to put these lights here and make the room look, bright. It's not that easy. It actually, as you'll see, a whole heck of a lot goes into lighting design. And so you'll definitely have an appreciation for that after you go through the content this week. All right. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoy the content. And if you have any questions, of course, let me know.